Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War News Update. First part thereof for the 5th of December 2024. Glad to have my NAFO patches and a nice handwritten note from one of the units. Awesome, lovely, beautiful bit of design on a NAFO patch there from JR initially, and then Chris at Clockwork Design, who put it all together, who's doing a marvellous job with Touchney as well. Right, okay, let's go on to Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. 1,580 personnel lost is an incredibly high number. a tad lower than we have seen over the last couple of days, but my goodness, the records are being blown out of the water in terms of personnel losses over those long-term averages. We've got a 30-day average and 7-day rolling average that have been consistently smashed over the last month or so. When we look at the data today, and Dell contacted me this morning to point out that there were a few data points to look at. We go up to the, if I can get it right, the personnel losses. We have a 7-day rolling average record of 1,760 per day and a 30-day rolling average of 1,576.67, so 1,577. Incredibly high numbers there for personnel losses over the course of these weeks and months. And then 13 tanks is a high number there over the daily average. 22 troop carrying AFVs just over the daily average, and the same for artillery systems. So we have some fairly challenging losses for the Russians there, and 97 vehicles and fuel tanks, 2 pieces of special equipment. So 97 vehicles and fuel tanks is an insanely large number, and that would suggest that, you put that together with tanks and troop carrying AFVs, that the Russians are losing an awful lot of equipment because they are no doubt attacking in a number of places. It is worth mentioning, though, that tank losses might not always be tanks. Here we have a T-62 tank that's been converted into a vehicle transport infantry transport vehicle. The chap speaking here notes that it has no turret and no barrel. It is a tank that has been turned very much into an APC and been given the old Mad Max treatment. This is a vehicle that has just been used to move troops from A to B. That is what the Russians need, of infantry and dismounts and whatnot. So all of these bits and pieces put all over it are to protect the infantry and to allow the infantry to hang off the side, to climb onto the top. This is a tank that is no longer a tank. And of course, this will go down, I would have thought, as a tank loss, because technically it is a tank. But actually, I wonder how many of these tanks are not really being used as tanks. They aren't effectively tanks. If you build all of that metalwork around the turret so it can't move, and it could well be that the barrel can't fire, there might be some defect. Rather than getting it fixed, they're sending them out as APCs. Then is this a tank? Not really. I mean, depends what your use of language is, but if you have a functional approach to language, then it's functionally an APC. Again, I've asked these questions 100 times, but I will repeat myself. The question is, why are they doing that to a tank rather than getting the tank fixed? Why aren't they getting an APC in to do the role of an APC? Why are they using cars and SUVs to deliver troops to the front line? These are all suboptimal solutions to what are no doubt problems with the lack of equipment. We saw a bicycle leading an infantry fighting vehicle, a BMP, across the field yesterday. Now, actually, that might have been a fairly, scare quotes, clever adaptation. I assume that cyclist was looking for mines, and cycling on a bicycle, you are less likely to trigger a mine. Depends what the trigger is. And that chap could lead the BMP over a very dangerous field. Okay, that's not a bad solution, all things considered, but it just, I don't know, I think it's a sign of the times, really, in terms of this war. The use of the mechanized equipment, the use of mechanized equipment is fascinating from both sides, but particularly the Russians. Now, when we go to losses, here's another Andrew Perpetual loss list that he has released. We can see about a 2-to-1 loss of Russian to Ukrainian vehicles. And when we look at the combat asset losses, it is about 1.5 to 1 there. We'll go and look at the Ukrainian losses first. Here we have 3 excavators, engineering vehicles, front end loader, excavator, 3 pieces of artillery, Grodzika, 3 tanks, T-64s, 4 IFVs, varying ones, YPR, a couple of, actually the YPR 765, which is an M113 rejigged by the Dutch, is actually the only Western one in the IFVs. The rest of them are Soviet era. And then APCs, 5 of them. We've got Snatch Land Rover. Hope it's not one we provided. M113, BTR, Novator, etc., etc. Oshkosh, Humvees, Senators, Humvees. They've been put down as infantry mobility vehicles, the Humvees and the Senators. It depends how they are. The Senators can be arranged in, and same with the Humvee. You can put different weaponry on top of a Humvee. You can, I don't know if you can change the armor particularly, but with the Senators, they can be MRAPs. They can be just infantry mobility vehicles moving people from A to B. The difference between an IMV and an APC, I presume it will be armor, really. So the armored personnel carriers, yeah, Humvees don't have huge protection. They are quite good at getting people from A to B. They're not that good at protecting them from larger munitions and mines. But yeah, a bit of a mix, about 50-50. I think with regard to destroyed against damaged, maybe, no, there's a few more destroyed and abandoned than damaged. And then trucks and civilian vehicles make up the rest of the list. Not a massive list for the Ukrainians today. For the Russians, we have an engineering vehicle at the top. We then go on to an unmanned ground drone, quite a mix of artillery pieces, including some anti-tank guns, the MT-12 Rapira, a Mishta B, a Jacint B, D-20 older towed howitzers there. 4 tanks for the Russians, bit of a mix, track guard and shed, all of them destroyed or abandoned. Infantry fighting vehicles, you've got about 10 there, just over half of them abandoned and destroyed. Usual mixes of BMPs and BMDs. Armored personnel carriers there, half dozen of them, all of them destroyed and abandoned, and a single MRAP as well. Quite a lot of ATVs, and this tells you something, doesn't it? Quads and golf buggies and other varieties of all-terrain vehicles. Civilian vehicles, quite a few of those on the list as well, and a few trucks too. I think this suggests that they are, if we go back to the general staff figures, you've got 97 vehicles on fuel tanks. Well, just on that day, the visually confirmed ones, all of those would fit into that category. ATVs, trucks as well, and they'll be using these as offensive vehicles. Some of these vehicles will be used as combat assets, effectively. Right, the British intelligence have released their interpretation of the Russian losses. Record month of the war in terms of Russian losses. We are talking about losses of 45,680 people. A month earlier, this figure was 41,980. So that's gone up 4,000 in a month. And it's January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. November is a 30-day month. And that gives you the impression that actually they lost even more, really. Because you could add, to compare that to the previous month, which is lower, you could add yet another maybe 2,000 on to that figure too. So an incredible month of losses, November. Okay, let's look at the UK MOD and what they have to say. We haven't seen this for a long time. Let's read it out today. Average daily Russian casualties, killed and wounded in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, reached a new monthly war high during November. Daily average was 1,523, according to Ukrainian General Staff reporting. So I find it interesting that the intelligence, UK intelligence, but not surprising, that they broadly fall in line with what the General Staff say. It would be very hard for them to be able to fact check that with any kind of accuracy. Like, how would you go about doing that? You'd just be looking at the same videos that the General Staff are looking at to equate their estimations, and I don't know whether the UK would have access to that. So it could be that a lot of this is taken on trust from the other intelligence sources. Like I've said to you before, you're not going to have British and American and European fact checkers, intelligence operatives walking around the battlefield with clipboards counting things up. So where do you get that data from? Well, some satellite imagery analysis, kind of like what Turchny do, or would it be better use of their resources to rely on Turchny, make sure that Turchny are doing a good job, but actually use their figures? We know that Kamishin, when he was the minister for strategic industries, he was using Turchny figures for drone strikes and whatnot. So open source plays a role, I think, in either supporting or providing supporting general staff figures or government figures, or providing completely independent figures. And if I was in charge of UK intelligence, how would I go about estimating how many Russian casualties there have been in a day? I'd be largely relying on the Ukrainians to do that. Anyway, sorry to repeat myself, but new viewers and all that. This is a third straight month that Russian forces have sustained new war high average daily losses. 28th of November also saw a new war high of 2,030 losses in a single day. First time more than 2,000 been reported. November was also likely the most costly month of the war for the Russians, with a total of 45,680 casualties reported by the General Staff. 1,980 were recorded in October. November is the fifth straight month that Russian forces have suffered an increase in total monthly total losses. And we saw that on a graph that I showed you in the SL the day before. High rate of casualties is likely reflective of the higher tempo of the Russian operations and offensives. Russia is attempting to increase the pressure on the Ukrainian lines as they seek to push for Ukrainian forces back on several fronts, including Kursk, Kupiansk, Toretsk, Pokrovsk, and Velika Novoselka. Russia's casualty rate will likely continue to average above 1,000 a day in December, despite the onset of winter, with continued dismounted infantry attacks on multiple axes. And there you go. And that's that same graph that we saw in the last post. Russian daily average losses there for 2022, 2023, and 2024. And actually, you think that December will see fewer losses because the weather is inclement, cold, freezing, but actually the ground hardens, and maybe you just see more. Well, evidently, these appear to be higher than at other points in the year. It looks like September in the previous year was a bit of a lower loss month, probably due to the rains, but who knows? May that's when the Ukrainians were. No, that's May 2024. So yeah, pretty high there. But then look at that really steady increase up to where we are now. Okay, now let's look at another graph here. So the quote, the influx of volunteers into the Russian army has noticeably decreased, although the payment for signing a contract has doubled. On average, the Russian armed forces recruit about 600 people a day, which may be less than the current losses. The recruitment of military personnel for contracts with the Russian Federation Armed Forces in the third quarter of 2024 decreased compared to the second quarter. This follows from the report from the execution of the federal budget published on the United Portal of the Budget System. Currently, the recruitment of new contract soldiers on average barely covers current losses. It can be stated that the current situation does not allow the Russian armed forces to accumulate significant reserves of many thousands, but at the same time does not lead to a sharp collapse, is the claim. It appears from the Russians, I gather. There's no source there for that, but it might be that's coming from that portal entry. This is a challenge for the Russians. They are losing an increased number of casualties every month, and we've just seen those figures go up and up and up to a record amount. And if you're losing 1,523 in a month, but you are only recruiting 600, then you have a net loss of 900. And if that is happening month on month, you are in serious trouble. And so when the Russians say they need to increase the size of the army by 180,000, they are really saying we need to replace those who we lost. We're not increasing the size of the army. That's pretty much where we're at in terms of losses. It is pretty horrendous. Interesting stats. And this is what the Ukrainians will want to see, which is the Russians, even though they've doubled the attractive salaries, initial salaries for these volunteers, they are getting half the number of volunteers they got previously, in the previous month, pretty much, and then much less than they got in April. No, in quarter four. Sorry, not April. In quarter four of 2023. They are in a lot of trouble. What are they going to do? Economically, they are tanking at the moment, the Russians. Can they do a full-scale mobilization? No, they can't. If they do, kiss goodbye to the economy, and there'll be a bit of a collapse in society, I think. How does Russia manage that? They need to do crypto mobilization, klepto-mobilization, as I call it, which is where you're just nicking people off the streets. We're seeing that happening more and more, and it could be that you do that through the guise of conscription, the annual conscription, but you're just taking more and more. A stout Russian man in a mask here is offering migrant construction workers says Dmitry, a service in the special military operations zone as a way to expedite obtaining a Russian passport. Judging by the situation, no one agreed. You've got a bunch of people here, although some are in army fatigues, they're not. They're just working on a construction site, from what I can work out. And all of them, heads down, don't want to look. They're being offered a place in the armed forces as they're working on building this whole site here, and no one seems to be particularly enthused about that. But that's the desperation that the Russians are facing, because look at that graph, they need boots on the ground, as do, of course, the Ukrainians. Now, it's not just as a result of dead and wounded, but also POWs. Here's another video of, I'm going to pause that, of 17 Russians getting killed, but 12 surrendering thanks to special forces in the Kursk region. The Ukrainians are still very active up in the Kursk region, and when they are taking prisoners, it means that they are actually having some success in taking back some territory. There's the village of Dorino, I think, where they've had some success in taking back some land. Here we have a montage of strikes on a Russian column near Sinkivka, so that's up near Kupiansk in the northeastern sector. In Kharkiv Oblast, the 114th Territorial Defense Brigade has taken out a column there. There's quite a few videos of lots of Russian equipment getting destroyed, but of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that they ain't losing ground. So the Russians will happily, it appears, lose lots of equipment, but still manage to take ground. You know, if you're attacking with 100 men, you just want 5 or 10 to get through. Massive attrition. 5 or 10 to get through to that tree line, attack with another 100 men, another 5 to 10, another 100 men, another 5 to 10, and then suddenly you've got 30 men in that tree line. But you've made incredible losses, but you are taking territory. And that's a kind of, yes, you can take unsustainable losses that mean you have to change behaviors so that your tanks are no longer tanks, but they're glorified APCs. Those are unsustainable losses of equipment, but you're still taking land. Okay, here we have the latest strike. So last night, another 44 Shahid drones were sent into Ukraine, and a missile as well. 2 Iskander M ballistic missiles indeed, and they got through. They weren't shot down. I don't know where they hit. 44 Shahid drones were launched. 30 of those were shot down. 12 taken out by electronic warfare, so that's 42. 1 was sent back to Belarus, 43. So that means that 1 drone got through to, one presumes, hit its target. Now, I don't know any data about that, and I've not really heard anything about Ukrainian strikes on Russia last night. So it seems to have been a fairly quiet night all around, even though, you know, a quiet night for the Ukrainians, still having to deal with 44 attack drones flying into Ukraine. Now, a Ukrainian drone has reportedly attempted to attack the Kasputin Yar testing ground at Astrakhan, Russia. So this is where they recently launched the Oreshnik, that medium-range, intermediate-range ballistic missile. Russian channels claim air defences shot it down near the entrance, with the blast wave damaging the gates. So, could be a case of the Ukrainians just testing this out. Wouldn't it be a bit of a coup if the Ukrainians could test out what air defences they got by sending in a couple of drones here and there, and then hit that with, I don't know, Palantirs or Neptunes or both, and take out the launch site for the Oreshnik? That would be a real kick in the shins for the Russians. Now, talking about the Oreshnik, apparently, so if you remember how pearl clutchy everyone was, with like, oh, this is World War III, what's what has Biden done? Oh my goodness, this is terrible. Tucker Carlson said it's the most evil thing he's ever that I've ever seen. He says as he goes out to Moscow to interview Sergei Lavrov and give Putin a mouthpiece again into Western minds. Yeah, I'll tell you what's evil, Tucker Carlson. You, your face, your entire entity, everything you say. That's what's evil. Anyway, personal grudges of tool bags aside, um, it's interesting that Gerasimov apparently had a conversation about sending the Oreshnik prior to sending it. So Oreshnik strike was planned before the long range strikes permission was given by Biden. In other words, this wasn't a reaction. It played out like that, and they happily used it like that, and that's the excuse they gave post facto. But actually, they were planning on doing this anyway. Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the general staff of the Russian army, held a rare phone call with his counterpart, US General Charles Q. Brown Jr. on November the 27th. The New York Times reported. My goodness. And then, that could well have been why I can't remember when it was, but the American embassy in Kiev was closed down, wasn't it? So it could have been a result of a phone call like that. But yeah, just irritates me that so many people in the West, particularly kind of these American MAGA types like Tucker Carlson and etc., they play into the Russian narrative. They just feed off it and regurgitate it to the general public, and it's really counterproductive. Russia have got such a purchase in the American psyche. It's depressing. Right, explosions were reported near the coastal city of Tartus. So this is a coastal city, the port of Tartus on the Syrian coast on the Mediterranean Sea. And I'm just mentioning this because if Tartus suddenly, if it comes under real pressure, we've already seen Russian naval vessels leave Tartus, then that is Russia's influence in the Mediterranean pretty much curtailed. How do they then operate in a way where they can be able to refuel their naval vessels and retool them? How can they do that and say get near to the Bosphorus Straits, to access the Black Sea? What does this say? If they lose Tartus, how will this affect the Russian operations? Really globally, to be honest. So you can get to Tartus by air, right? So you can drop cargo ship planes can fly from Russia, drop a load of ammunition and supplies for those ships, refuel, or those ships can refuel and then get all their weaponry on board, and that allows them to have a constant presence in the Mediterranean. And you've got the Suez Canal, and the Mediterranean leads out to the Atlantic Sea, Suez Canal into the Indian Ocean, etc., etc. Well, you take that out, and you've got the Bosphorus Straits closed. What does that mean about Russian naval presence? Fascinating. So this is one to definitely watch. Okay. Moving on to other bits and pieces. So Russia, talking about boats, Russia has gathered 300 boats to cross the Dnipro River amid an attempted attack in Kherson Oblast, according to the Ukrainian military. Attempted attacks, actually multiple. Russian troops are storming the Kherson direction in an attempt to gain a foothold on some islands in the Dnipro River Delta, according to Vladislav Voloshin, the spokesperson for the Ukrainian military's southern command to Suspilna. My goodness, they seem to be attacking everywhere. I don't know what the outcome has been to that kind of activity, though. Something to keep an eye on. Right, this is a piece from the Daily Telegraph on youngsters being forcibly placed in Russia. So stolen Ukrainian children have been put up for adoption on websites funded by Putin. So Putin's already got an arrest warrant on his head from the International Criminal Court. And now a landmark report identifies 314 youngsters forcibly placed in Russia's program of coerced adoption and fostering. As Diane Chater says, some of these children are forever lost. Some of them are too small to even remember what happened to them. They will be taught to hate their motherland. It's the most hideous crime out of all the crimes this country has created against us. It is horrible, isn't it? horrible, to steal children and brainwash them. Horrific. Chris Owicki says that Russian soldiers are being incentivized with financial bonuses or extra leave if they shoot down drones. This has reportedly led to some Russians deliberately shooting down their own drones to earn the benefits being offered. The Russian military analyst Alexei Sukonkin writes, quote, "It's been clear to everyone for a long time that the main problem on the front line is drones. All possible methods are used to combat them, and incentives have been introduced for those fighters who shoot down enemy birds. At the same time, so that their birds do not suffer in the heat of the moment, the commanders of the interacting units agree on the flight corridors of allied copters. However, there is a nuance. Everyone wants to go on vacation or get a bonus, and the prevalence of the personal over the collective begins to manifest itself. That is liberalism in its purest form. The main thing is the individual. I'll tell you how it looks. For example, the commanders of the interacting units agree with each other on the takeoff of a reconnaissance drone with a thermal imager from a specific location and the corridor along which it will move over their positions. Then the drone group moves to the starting point and at dusk launches its Mavic, getting to work. Having noticed the drone crew arriving in advance, those who want a bonus and want to go on vacation sit in ambush nearby or right under the expected flight corridor and wait for the bird to take off, after which they shoot it down with small arms fire, grab the carcass from the ground and race to their commander with a report on the combat success. Of course, the commander encourages them, they are happy, and this was, for example, the last Mavic in the regiment with a thermal imager. From now on, the unit will be left without night vision for 2 or 3 weeks, which the enemy takes full advantage of with impunity, calmly rotates its units on the front line, calmly brings its sabotage groups into our rear. In short, for the sake of the vacation of one lucky guy, the entire regiment comes under fire, and under fortunate circumstances, the entire division. But the main thing is the individual, and the entire team suffers then. These creatures don't give a damn." Well, yeah, there you go. Interesting, albeit anecdote there, of coming from the Russians of what problems they face in introducing these incentives. And remember, I showed you this video actually previously where they shot down their own drone. I don't know whether they did it on purpose, but this was like they were celebrating this online, and it turned out to be one of their own drones. Anton Gerashchenko reports going to Russian finances here, or the Russian economy. Russian media report that the state-managed VTB, one of the largest Russian banks, could crash rather soon. VTB was taken out a loan from the Russian central bank for 2 trillion rubles. That's about $19 billion. There are no signs that it will be able to repay the loan anytime soon. Russian media suppose that should the bank crash, the right people would be able to get their money out, while ordinary shareholders would not be able to sell their shares for a year or two. The bank has 23.1 million clients and serves almost 1 million businesses, according to open data. It is on the sanctions list and has been disconnected from the SWIFT system. A crash or any significant problems at VTB would spell trouble for the entire Russian economy. And that would be what the Ukrainians would want. That would be what the Americans would want. This is, yes, sanctions work. I keep telling you this, they work. They might have taken a lot longer than people were expecting. There might be many loopholes. You just got to keep at it, keep plugging away. And eventually Russia will not be able to sustain these economic losses through their national wealth fund and through trying to tinker with this and tinker with that. They've kind of run out of options, and I'm hoping this is just one big Greek tragedy. And by Greek tragedy, I'm referring to the collapse of the Greek economy as well, in a very clever pun. Just seen that Elon Musk lets all the official Russia accounts flourish on Twitter, says Tim White, or Jitter, pushing hatred, lies, disinformation, and yet Ukraine army page with 500,000 followers is suspended. We know what the priorities are. So this is inside the AFU. I don't think it's not the official MOD page, but it is a big old Twitter account that just gets suspended for violating the rules, and yet all other sorts of stuff is. I was reading something about how the Texas Observer has a piece on how there are anti-Semitic, like neo-Nazis, are really prevalent online on Twitter now, and even Elon Musk has interacted with 2 of them, reposting stuff, and you're like, it's just an absolute shite show. But yeah, if Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Elon Musk are saying X, Y, and Z, about Ukraine and pro-Russian stuff, then there you go. That's all you need to know. There's no surprise that accounts like this get closed down on Twitter and completely disreputable ones continue to exist. And then, like, it's just about piecing all this together. This is horrific, in my opinion. So, what do we have here? A Ukrainian spokesperson at the United Nations is talking about how Russians are bombing their cities and killing their people and kidnapping Ukrainian children. And this is how the Russian representative at the UN Security Council reacts on the facts that Russians' war crimes are taking place against Ukrainian children.
Russia will never be able to alter its authorship from the atrocities committed in Ukraine. We can hardly imagine their father's sorrow. Those weren't military targets. Those were homes many kilometers far from the front lines. Ordinary people, children, changed. Russia will never be able to alter its...
Just, how funny. War crimes. They do make me laugh. You Ukrainians with your Russians killing civilians and stealing children. I'm so evil. I'm so evil. I'm such a bad human. You are a bad human being. Anyone representing Russia politically in the international political domain is, as far as I'm concerned, pretty evil. It's like a Bond villain. Just like... just... And then you get Tucker Carlson going to give them a mouthpiece. Then you get Candace Owens spouting off whatever gibberish she is that's pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian. Then you get even Lex Friedman like, I'll interview Zelensky. Yeah, it's good, excellent. And now he said, I want to go and interview Putin as well. Give a bit of both sidesism. Just like in the Second World War, I would like, I'll give Churchill an interview. I'm going to give Hitler an interview. Give him a chance to get his point across. And I'll do that in Berlin. I'll interview Putin in Moscow. So, I'll really feel comfortable with challenging him. Really feel able to give him a really tough interview and not feel like I'm going to get arrested. So, in other words, by Lex Friedman now saying he wants to interview Putin, it's just that I'm going to allow Putin, just like Tucker Carlson and Sergei Lavrov and Putin, I'm going to allow Putin to just use my platform as a megaphone to disseminate disinformation in the minds of my audience, predominantly American. We've let ourselves be duped by Russia. Well done, Russia. You've played us. You played us like a frickin' fiddle. There are people in the US that are being played by you. And do you know what? They've been voted into Congress. Absolute shocker. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Please press the subscribe button up there if you haven't already. That would be fantastic. Also, I want to give a massive thanks today. Of course, to all the members here. All of the members here, wonderful. Those top tier members. That honestly, I wouldn't be able to do this on a monthly, daily, weekly, daily, hourly basis without your assistance. Michael Winkler, particularly an incredible assistance to the channel. Thank you, Michael, very much for your help. Just a few other people. I'm going to do people who've helped me supported the channel through PayPal, and I'll do Buy Me a Coffee tomorrow. Magnus Anderson, Robert Sharp, this is going back some time, and recently Eloise Lowe, Jason Scaife, David Lewis, really kind. Thank you for all of you. Jason Scaife, that's really generous. Anthony Dyer, Mark Biscu is just always a legend. Andy Erdovich, Andrei Erdovich, Axel Granersdorf, Peter Smith, Matt Kirk, Marcus Wichitil, thank you very much. And who else? Just a few more. Peter Lauren, Mark Biscu again. Really, really appreciate it. And finally, Peter Kluken, who is a total legend as well. A few more: Adam Henshaw, Axel Granersdorf. Again, this is going back several months. Mikey Ward, Mikey from Cambridge, Robert Rayner. Really appreciate that. And finally, Nick Stanton again. Thank you. And David Lewis. So really appreciate all of you guys over the months supporting me. Thank you very much. And please subscribe, because I'm trying to get to 50,139 by the 2nd of January. Arbitrary numbers by arbitrary times. It's what it's all about. Help me do that. Go on. You know you want to. Take care. Speak soon.